Consider This with Carol Schrader is supported in part by Better Business Equipment and by Nebraskans for Public Television. Consider This with Carol Schrader, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the UNO television studios, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome back to UNO. You know, we have a lot of fine professionals in this city, and certainly a lot of fine professionals, knowledgeable people here at UNO, but every so often there are a couple of folks that are in demand. I mean, you can't even get a hold of them on the phone. And it's because they compile a lot of research numbers and do a lot of research. But this year, with the census figures released just a couple of weeks ago, these have been two busy people. In fact, I had to wait till now to get them. So let me introduce to you from the UN Omaha Center for Public Affairs Research, Senior Research Associate Jerry Dykert.
Hi.
And Research Associate Dave Pfeiffer.
Hi.
And you have had quite 2 weeks. I mean, this is an important benchmark time.
Yeah, everybody wants the information immediately. It's not like 10 years ago or 20 years ago when the information came out, people could wait an hour or two. We had people practically camping on the doorstep to get it when it came out. So yeah, it was kind of busy and hectic when the information came out. It was March 15th. Remember that day?
Gee, you have March 15th, and
Yeah.
then a month later
That's
you have
right.
your taxes due. What is it about? I mean, can't anybody just go to a website and get the information? I'm sure the government has it. I mean, why is there? Are you sort of one of the intermediaries of information?
Yeah, we are an intermediary of census and all kinds of statistical information, not just census information. And yes, obviously we've progressed from 10 years ago, and you can get a lot of information off of the internet and off of websites. Still, you know, when it came out on March 15th, we were, after the governor's office and legislative research, we were the first office to get it. And
Well, the news media, of
yeah,
course, always wants the spin.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
what happened this time is too, because it's supposed to go to the governor first in the legislature, is that it wasn't released to the news media until after they had a chance to see it. And so there was probably about a 3 or 4 hour lag before it was actually released and it was up on the web. So in that 4 hour period, people were scrambling to try to get a copy of it.
In addition to making sure that they had the raw numbers, I know people call on you a little bit to not maybe analyze in terms of the end meaning, but interpolate a little bit of what the numbers mean, because this census was different in a couple of ways, was it not?
Yeah.
Makes the numbers a little more ambiguous.
yeah, one thing they did this time around that's new is the way that they measured race and ethnicity. In the past, people were required to check one box only, identify yourself as this race or another race, and this time around, reflecting the change in society, they allowed for multiple responses on the race category. So now to compare to how we've changed in the past in terms of our racial makeup is a little more difficult because it was measured differently in 1990 than it was now.
The old apples and
to
oranges.
And there are ways to make those comparisons, but it gets a little trickier, and that's why it's nice to have some intermediaries kind of help you through that process.
What were the big questions that people were interested in first? You know, the big three, let's say, or four.
Well, let's say 3 or 4. One was, what were the particularly Hispanic population, because everybody knew the Hispanic and Latino population in the state was growing. And so that was the big one, was how fast was that growth? And the other thing was just how fast did Nebraska grow, and which county grew faster, or which city grew faster, and how is that different than it was in the past? And so kind of the ranking kinds of questions, those were interesting. The other kind of question that has started to filter in now is, because these numbers are used for redistricting, we want to know, well, which legislative districts are going to be split and which ones are going to get bigger, and will we lose a state senator, and those kinds of
and
questions.
will the rural area,
Yeah.
you know, that rural-urban split, this is
Right.
real. I mean, first the thing off is, and we knew that early on, that we had enough raw numbers not to lose a congressional seat.
Right.
Right.
We knew that before the 15th of March, that it was, we're 1.7 million, give or take.
Yeah.
Right.
people in Nebraska, and that was kind of the first, and we were pretty sure of that, but
Right.
that's just a nice thing to have in black and white. Then we've got the legislature that has to deal with redistricting, and we already have all kinds of political pressures, urban versus rural, and they're really sweating that out. The rural areas did take some real hits.
Right, and it's also going to be on, the other issue is on redistricting the congressional districts. Part of Cass County was in the 2nd congressional district, and that's obviously going to be moved someplace, and probably the 1st. But there may have to take part of Sarpy or part of Douglas. I don't know. We don't know how big that or how small that 2nd district is going to be. And so it may be that not all of Douglas and Sarpy County will be in the 2nd congressional district.
Isn't that unconstitutional? I mean, when you grow up with kind of knowing what, even though at first you realize you're in an irregular chunk of land known as the 1st or 2nd or 3rd congressional district, but that's kind of a big psychological. A lot of these are psychological. They mean real things to real people, but they become very psychological.
Sure. And even you look at the city council districts are going to be changed. And anything that is allocated based on people are going to be changed in the next, 6 months to a year.
We have to remember, first and foremost, the census was mandated because of the one man, one vote concept. I mean, so even though we use the census figures for federal dollars and distribution of different kinds of aid, I mean, it still comes down to the real deal is making sure that people are elected in a fair way, and that those who are elected are, as much as you can, have some sort of even
Equal
weight.
representation in the House of Representatives, absolutely.
Now, we gained people in Nebraska, but we gained more, I think, than Iowa.
Right.
But we are still below the average. What does that mean? Is that what people are asking you? What does that mean?
Well,
Okay, if you don't feel comfortable saying what
People
does
haven't
that mean?
asked us that.
I haven't asked you to interpret, but I mean, this is big stuff too.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that happened is the state grew about 8.4% and the U.S. grew 13 something or other. So even though Nebraska grew, since we grow at a slower rate, if that continues, then we're talking about redistricting, then there is the possibility of losing that 3rd congressional seat, even though we are growing, if we're not growing fast enough. So that's one of the implications of it. The other implication is that even though the growth was throughout the state, it was more in the urban areas, and so we have more and more of a concentration of the state's population in fewer and fewer counties. And the other thing that we found is that a lot of the state's growth happened in counties that have meat packing, and so
Well, and then that's reflected in the growth in the Hispanic population.
and we see those kinds of things going on. So, that. And one other interesting thing that I'm working on right now is there are probably somewhat less than half the counties in the state that had more deaths than births over that time period. So they lost population not because people moved out, but because they didn't replace the population that died with births.
This is we've been hearing a lot about terms. In fact, the department that you serve in within the university, known as CPACs, and I always get this wrong. What is CPAC?
College of
Public
Affairs and Community Service.
Okay.
Correct.
It's just a mouthful for me. Your department does a lot of research that relates, and they
Yes.
recently just released one on the sort of brain drain.
Right.
But this gets to the heart of a lot of factors. You mentioned more deaths than births, but and that one county didn't reflect a drain.
Right.
But we still have a population that still skews older. In terms of, there's nothing wrong with skewing older, except that we know that a healthy economy and probably just a healthy environment needs even
Sure.
strata.
You need even distribution. We talk about labor shortages, and we're concerned about where we're going to get people to fill certain kinds of jobs. And if you're looking to fill entry-level jobs, you have to have people have to have been born 20 years ago.
The young people do that and
That's
work
right.
up the
That's
ladder, but it's all
If
they're
you didn't have the births, if you didn't have those young people down the chain in school, when it comes time to fill those entry-level jobs, there aren't going to be the workers there.
And the other thing that happens when you lose young adults, not only do you lose that age group, then you lose the potential for their kids later on, and so
The next-
you're,
the
next
you lose
next group
generation.
of young.
the next generation. And so what happens is then your age distribution just keeps getting older.
Okay, what happens? Well, I guess maybe I'm asking you to predict the future, but another reason that this is a concern is because when you look to diversify or keep a somewhat diversified economy, which is just vital in a state, and we're going to start looking at more areas out west that become just a land of people and no new industry or no replacing old ones that die out because they don't have a lot of things that the companies want, but certainly people is right up there.
On the top of the list.
You know,
sure.
you may not have an interstate right by there, so they have some other battles to fight, or maybe you're not wired enough for all this information technology.
Sure.
But certainly, people. I mean, that's the first thing I would
First thing
think.
you look for, and you have to have. It's helpful. I wouldn't say you have to, but it's helpful
Yeah,
to
it depends on the business.
have that critical mass. And if you look at the population shifts in Nebraska over several decades, you'll see that the areas of large concentrations of people get bigger. This is a generality, but it largely
Yeah.
holds true. And then those areas that are more sparsely populated just tend to decline, or at best they don't grow as fast.
And it's not just jobs; it's the amenities.
Right,
Do you have
sure.
enough to support that kind of quality of life that we kind of expect as a minimum?
Sure.
To keep young people, among other things. What about poor little Peru, Nebraska?
Well, you know, that's one of the things that is kind of an interesting one, where it looks like they lost 500 people, you know, thereabouts. And
It's Camelot. Didn't they?
Yeah.
Didn't those people just disappear over so many years?
They're not lost. They're just misplaced. What happened? In all likelihood, we don't know for sure, but yet it'll be determined. But what happened? In all likelihood is those people were counted, and just by way of background, Peru has about 1,000 people, and I think they counted about 500 of them this time, and the other 500 are missing in action. They were probably counted, but it was just an issue of the Census Bureau having the boundaries wrong for the city. So those 500 people were probably counted in the statewide totals, but not included in the Peru city totals. And it's the dorm at Peru State College.
But this is a real, in the microcosm, is a real example of if you drop a notch, whatever
Sure. Yeah.
notch it is that determines can you support a grade school,
Sure.
can you support this or that. When you drop a notch, whether it's losing a congressional district or whatever, that it can change forever the future of that town or area.
sure,
Sure.
in Nebraska, the city has to be of 5,000 or more to be a first-class city. If they drop below that, then they have to change their charter, and different things happen. And so, you know, some towns are close to dropping below 5,000, and then that's an issue that they're facing.
Now we face the issue of not growing as fast as other states, but we have had, like many states, in search of one thing that helped us grow, even though it wasn't the average or above, was the Hispanic population.
Sure.
And that is now changing the minority picture, and I assume the outcome would be minority politics and the politicking for. You know, it may not be great if you're a minority and you don't like being a minority, but you don't want to be the minority.
Right.
You might want to be the majority minority,
majority
depending on.
You know, looking at minority growth, we don't want to throw out a lot of statistics here, but roughly 3/4 of our growth over the last decade was minority population, and the other quarter was non-minority. The minority population grew something like 80 some odd %, and the white non-Hispanics was like 2%.
But that
So, yeah, I mean,
probably
it's-
reflects the country
Right,
more or less.
right. Nebraska was. I mean, there's the differential between the growth rate in the Hispanic and other racial groups compared to white, but in Nebraska, the disparity is probably a lot greater than the
greater.
nation as a whole.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
It's quite a bit.
So
We're growing. The minority population in the state of Nebraska is growing faster than the nation.
well, we had so many white people before.
Well, that's
probably-
that's the reason why, is because there
so
was a
noticeable.
smaller base, and so you tackle a larger number on a small base, you get a big percentage change, and that's
Right.
what's happening.
But that's going to be felt. I mean, we look at the, and I don't know, didn't know the old numbers, and I don't know the new numbers of
Yeah.
the city council districts in Omaha, but the southeast Omaha, that could make a change this next election. It
Sure.
could be down the road, but we.
And I've seen instances, or there's been talk about a Hispanic group that's getting together to look at redistricting, not just for the council districts, but school districts and legislative districts and that. And so they're focusing on that issue right now.
We're starting then for probably, other states and other areas have, I think we could point years ago to the South, where there was probably, I don't want to be unfair, but I think there was an effort early on after civil rights legislation and whatnot to make sure that there weren't black districts, that they didn't have enough clout to have one district. So, I don't think that's going to happen where people try to exclude giving that much power to one city councilman or one state senator. However, that's kind of a growing pain when you start to get a larger minority population.
Yeah, there's kind of a trade-off, because you want to make sure that if it's possible that the district has a high enough percentage so that you don't dilute the population.
Correct.
But you don't want to pack everybody in one district. So there's that kind of trade-off. How do you draw the boundary so there's an adequate representation, but you don't pack it and put everybody in one district?
Well, and is there still a sense of neighborhood? Is
Right,
there
and
still a
still
sense of
sense-
identity?
Right.
For instance, if you took all of one area of Southeast Omaha and then one little strip that moved west, well, that makes both sides feel uncomfortable, because it's not, you look for commonalities
Yeah,
besides
there's-
just,
Yeah, and they call it compactness.
oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah,
that's-
there's
I
a-
remember that.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was going to say there's a couple of there's two really, I don't say competing considerations, but complementary considerations. On the one hand, you want to look at the population characteristics and again make sure that you're counting different minority, racial, ethnic groups properly, and again giving them adequate, the representation that they deserve. At the same time, you've got geographic considerations, again, the compactness and having areas that are contiguous, and you don't have these long, stretched out gerrymandering kinds of things that were common decades ago.
That was the word I was looking for. Thank you. Gerrymandering.
Sure, that was
just
the-
escaped me.
the-
And I even learned that word here at UNO.
Salamander-shaped district, the classic example.
What are the, down the road a little, when federal funding and things are worked out, and we never know what's going to be affected by the census figures and how, do we have reason to be concerned, just kind of a best guess about our return on tax dollars based on our kind of changes in population?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that there's a reason to be concerned so much as there's a reason to appreciate. I don't think we fully appreciate all of the things, both on the government side and also on the private sector, that rely on census information. Not only government programs and where to put schools and where to put government services and maybe dollars that are allocated to areas on the basis of their population or on the basis of other characteristics. But then also, again, the private sector uses census statistics immensely in terms of marketing, research, or
Where to put that next super
where to
target.
put that next super target, sure. Absolutely.
Classic example. Children, I think, because they are our future, but they can be impacted the most, not in terms of the services small children get, but I mean in terms of their future in a town or a state.
Sure. If if your neighborhood is behind the curve, or you miss out on some development that you might have gotten because we use the example of people wanting to be counted, making sure that people are counted, and if either you're not counted properly or adequately, or maybe you were counted but we don't use the information well, and that's the kind of what our office does, is try to help people use that information. It's great, we've spent all this effort and money and time to count people and to produce these big data sets that you think about people with green eye shades analyzing in computer rooms, but now how do we get that information out to the general public? How do you get it out to the government sector, to the private sector, to help people use it to make informed decisions?
How is it underused? How do you think the census is underused?
One thing that happens is people just aren't aware of it. They don't think of it. And again, a large
I don't wake up in the morning and go, "How can I use
corporation
this?"
obviously, sure, knows that. But a neighborhood organization, or PTA, and they're trying to think about how they can band together. They're getting together a neighborhood watch, or they want to know how maybe they're writing a small grant for their neighborhood or whatever, and maybe they don't have the knowledge of census statistics or the expertise. And how can they first off, be aware of what's out there, and second off, once they're aware of it, how can they access it?
So really on that smaller level,
Sure.
One of the interesting things, Dave probably can tell the story better, but because he worked with the, what was it, the Red Cross?
Red Cross. We had the floods a couple of years ago, and they were the Red Cross needed information on the number of people in certain small areas of town and their characteristics to, again, as part of their reaction to the flooding.
well, I think even as a result of that, both their experience with the flood and looking at the numbers, there's now a branch in North Omaha.
Sure.
I mean, that was part of the, I mean, so
Yeah, you plan for services, and then disaster reacting to that is a small example of how census information is used that you don't think about too much.
Well, and the other thing that people don't think about is how the information is actually presented. And we think of Omaha and maybe congressional districts and big things, but in order to build those big things, we start off with little blocks, and we start off with city blocks. And so they have a count for every block in the state, the number of people that live there. And so if you wanted to build up and look at your neighborhood association or your neighborhood, and you wanted to look at 10, 20 blocks, you could find out how many people live there and add them up and figure that out. So we really do start off at the very smallest level possible when we start aggregating things.
and those things just add up, don't they?
They just add up.
But even in the the block or 2 or 3 or 10, if you were worrying about what areas might have lead in the dirt, or I mean,
Absolutely.
and how many people
Oh,
are
yeah.
affected. I mean, anything where you're trying to figure how people are affected translates into numbers, and those numbers are sitting there in that data.
Sure, especially if you start to get some of the other information out that we don't have now.
Oh, what's to come?
Well, right
good
now all we
stuff.
have are numbers of people, and by race. But later on this summer, we'll have some more detail on age and housing household characteristics. But then next
Income?
Next year's
Next year.
income. But if you think about it,
This is like a good mini-series.
That's
right. That's right.
they release it a little bit at a time, and so stay tuned for next year. But there's information on people who have mobility disabilities. So if you're thinking about disaster planning, and you want to know how many people within a 10-mile radius around, say, Fort Calhoun, have some kind of mobility,
Cannot move on their own.
or don't have access to a vehicle.
Or if you're planning on starting a business that would help, or looking for a grant to help
Sure.
those
Right.
with mobility
Now,
problems.
we just got a call from somebody from Cherry County, which had, I don't remember.
Do
what-
they have any people in Cherry
Well,
County?
Oh,
Cherry-
yes.
Yeah.
No,
but
I'm just, it's very vast.
well,
area.
but there are, right now I think there are 11 counties in the state that have less than 1,000 people in them. So we have some very, very small counties in the state. Cherry County is not one of them. But they had a program where they had a phone or an alert in some of the homes, and they were trying to figure out, well, how many people over 65 were there in their county that they could keep getting the grant to support some of those programs. Well, the only way they can find out is from information that's collected from the census.
Wow. We talked earlier about Peru, Nebraska. Overall, are you hearing any general trend of complaints about things not being counted right? I'm sure there are little areas that are concerned.
Peru's the main one, and there are probably others. Next, the Census Bureau actually has a process by which government counties and cities can challenge the counts, and that comes up here in a couple of months. So
Small towns, though,
Small
are
towns.
easy to resolve that problem, I think, because, I mean, they can they can almost physically go
Right.
out
Exactly,
and do this.
sure.
But what about are we hearing nationally or even locally about the bigger metropolitan areas, or how we're going to resolve those questions?
I mean, nationally, the issue is always it's an imperfect process, and I think that goes without saying. You do the very best you can to try to count people, and you're aiming at a moving target. It's the largest peacetime mobilization of people that the country does, is to take the decennial census. And
Oh, that's what decennial.
decennial, that's another
Okay,
big word.
That's another word. I don't get to use it real often, but
The every 10-year census, and it's a huge undertaking. And do people get missed? Sure. They have a vast array of processes in place to try to do the very best they can. That is an issue. If you're missed, it costs you in terms of representation. It costs you in terms of dollars and in terms of private services that might not come to your area because people don't realize that they're is the population base there to support those?
Something as basic as food and housing.
Sure,
for-
and it's a 10-year thing. So I mean, once those numbers are out, and again they have that challenge process, but once the challenges are done and it's resolved, I mean that's your number, and you're stuck with it.
Remember before the election, or I don't know, it probably would have happened whether we had an election or not, but the questions about, and I think it was a little Republican Democrat.
Do you adjust or not adjust the numbers?
Yeah.
Sure, the issue was we
computer models
yeah, we
and-
can't count everybody. We know that we're going to miss some people, and what they do is after they actually do the count of the census, they go out and do a national survey that these kind of for quality control to assess how well they did. And what happens is they find that they count some groups better than others. If you missed everybody more or less equally, it really wouldn't matter. If you think about dividing up a pie,
Right.
you know, if we miss everybody the same, the pie is still whatever size it is. and the
Relative
slice
to other pieces.
Exactly, the slice,
Right.
it doesn't matter. But the issue becomes, well, if we're relatively different in how we count different groups, if African Americans are counted less than whites or whatever group, then you have some disparities, and
But they
that's
sort
a
of
concern.
nixed this.
Yeah, but the decision was that in this case, the Census Bureau's decision was that we've analyzed our post-enumeration survey, and we've decided we've done about as good as we can do, and adjusting isn't going to make it any better. So the Census Bureau actually opted not to. That was our technical recommendation, besides the political aspects that were going on both sides.
We've just got less than a couple of minutes left, but the thing that that you said about being able to perhaps steer groups, I mean, census data is pretty scary if you've never worked with it, like
Right.
a small neighborhood
Sure.
group, but they can get a little direction from you folks?
Yeah, and there are a couple of things that we're working on. We have a neighborhood center that the college is trying to get established.
Right.
And I don't know if you've talked about that in the past, but I think when
I
the
know
dean was
they're
on,
very,
right.
I mean, they've got courses on neighborhoods and neighborhood
Right.
organizing.
And
I
so
mean,
in part of that, we're trying to develop that as maybe one aspect of that is kind of on data analysis or information processing, or something to help those folks get together and understand how to use this information. So that's one of the ways in which we're doing it. And but we get lots of phone calls, and we're more than willing to do what we can.
Okay, well, listen, folks, it's the University of Nebraska at Omaha, or UN Omaha, as we call it out here, Center for Public Affairs Research. My guests today were Jerry Dykert and Dave Pfeiffer. Fun with numbers, very important numbers.
Well, thanks for having
And
us
Thanks
on.
for having
thank you
us.
for joining us. And remember, you can see this show streamed on the World Wide Web. Just go to unotv.unomaha.edu. We'll be back next week. Thanks for joining us on Consider This.
Consider This, with host Carol Schrader, is supported in part by Better Business Equipment and by Nebraskans for Public Television.